But I want to welcome everybody and thank you for joining us on the Art of the Ask. And our financial foundations is a webinar that Jeff and I have decided to do quarterly. And so we're finding topics that people have had questions on and concerns on and would like more information, and we're just hoping that we can find another avenue to bring them to you. And this is the vehicle that we've chosen as a webinar, and so we hope it is beneficial. Jeff, of course, is the Executive Director of the Finance Department for the conference, and I'm the Executive Director for the Dakotas United Methodist Foundation. We have been fortunate that we've partnered in many of the different areas so that we can come together and be stronger in our resources and pool our resources to be able to help all of you out in the churches. Oh, I guess. So, the art of the ask. This, to many, many, many people, is one of the scariest things they can do. It is something that they shy away from, that they hope will go away, that they hope they can avoid, that they hope somebody else will do. But asking people to share their resources is really an intimidating and can be an intimidating factor for many. Whenever I put a presentation such as this together, or I get to work on something as this, I was telling Jeff the other day, I get as energized as he does when he puts a chart together. So to me, the art of the ask, the bottom line is that it's relationship building, and that's what I love to do. So we'll talk through this a little bit today, and if you have questions, please type them in and we'll try to get back to you. If you have something you'd like to share, maybe we can do that periodically or maybe at the end of the webinar.
Yeah, there is a little chat balloon up near the top there that might be helpful for people. It's just easier to coordinate things when there's the chat there, but then we can open up the audio at the end.
So if you take a minute and think about your first memory of fundraising, and these are just to yourself, but take a second and think about what is your first memory of fundraising. Jeff, you want to answer?
Well, I remember my first. It wasn't Boy Scouts or anything like that, but we used to do magazine sales for our school. And you know, you think about it. What was my primary reason for doing magazine sales? They told me to do it. That was the primary reason. I knew I had to do it. And there was a small prize if I was that motivated, but I wasn't that motivated. So only my family heard about it. But yeah.
So basically you were saying that your purpose for your ask then is because you had to. You wanted to participate, you had to.
Exactly.
And I'm sure everybody on the call has an experience like that. And if you didn't sell it as a kid, you ended up selling something for your own kids, maybe as an adult. We had a board member share to us that when he had to sell, I think it was Boy Scout popcorn, I can't remember, Jeff, it was at our last board meeting, that his dad took it to the office because they had 400 employees, so he was able to just lay it out there. If it was only that easy in the churches, and it's not. So where do we begin? And this is sort of the question that I get a lot. And you go to where your comfort zone is, but do you cultivate donors? And understand as we go through this, we will be referencing donors and members sort of interchangeably because they are donors, they're members of your churches, and so that'll be an interchangeable word that we use. Or prospecting. How do we prospect and who do we look for within our churches? Or do we build our case? And truly, it's the chicken and the egg. I feel when we do it that sometimes in the back of my mind all the time when I'm fundraising and when I'm thinking of different projects that we're working on, I try to think of somebody that our project would resonate with. But to be able to do that, I have to have a story to tell to build our case. So cultivating donors and prospecting, it's developing relationships. It's getting to know the people in your pews. It's getting to know the people of your church. Building a case is really just telling your story. And I'm not trying to just simplify this into a fact to make it look this easy, but this is truly the two basic concepts in these two areas of cultivating donors and building a case. So you want to develop those relationships and tell them the story of what you're doing within your churches. Jeff, did you want to add here?
Well, the part I think about, Sherry, is that you are so much stronger relationally than a lot of people. That part, I wonder if that's why you tend to say build your case. Because for some of us, we automatically go to the case. That's I make a spreadsheet, I build my case, I get the facts together. And so for me, then I got to go and focus on developing relationships. So it's just interesting. But like you say, I wonder if sometimes it matters what your personality is or your natural orientation towards are you normally a planner or a people person? But I agree 100% that it's the two parts. You got to have the relationship in order to make that a fit. So.
Well, we're going to start today by talking about how to build that case. How to build the case, how to tell your story. What are you wanting to raise the funds for? What do you see in your churches? What ministries are there that you want to tell the people in your churches about? And one of the biggest mistakes that we make is that we assume everybody should know the great things that are happening in our churches. Through this webinar, I'll reference some of the stuff we do in the conference too. We talk about our programs so much internally that we make assumptions that everybody else that we talk to should know about those. And what we actually know is that we have to continually tell our story. Does the cause for your appeal to your members, do you have a reason for your members to want to be part of your cause? The people in the pews. This is where so many people, and this is in the churches, and I bring the outside world into the conference too because of the fundraising and the relationship building and the director that I was for other nonprofits outside of the conference, is you as a leader can get caught up in a pet project. Wouldn't this be great? But has everybody bought into it? Does everybody think that project is great? And is it just a single-minded idea that you individually or a small committee thinks would be wonderful? Is your leadership team on board? Does everyone know? Now, that doesn't mean that every individual on the leadership team has to be on board, but there's a consensus or a vote on your leadership to move forward. And I think that's a big difference because people will say, we can't go forward with our project because Mrs. Smith didn't want it. Well, Mrs. Smith maybe didn't want it, but did the majority of the people that you are working with, were they interested in it? Is it something that those you are wanting to ask for dollars are interested in? Is it a compelling story? Is it a compelling ministry? Most of the stories that you will tell within the churches are the ministry of your churches. It needs to lead back to the ministries, back to your mission statements, your vision statements. Is it compelling to those that have the resources that you're asking for? And this one Jeff and I see a lot, and he'll talk to it in a minute too, but packaging your needs is better than soliciting for just one single item. You want to make sure that when you are packaging and putting together a campaign or building your case, that you want to have different areas appealing to different people. we many times get, oh no, we need a boiler. Our boiler's going to go out. Well, the boiler is not going to appeal to everybody in the church. So how do you package that? How do you package it with the ministries that you're doing, with a more appealing welcome center, with upgraded video and new equipment and those type of things? You want to have something that is going to cover a whole range or a whole array of different people, but you don't want to just, we see it all the time that we're fundraising for a roof, or we're fundraising for a boiler, or we're fundraising for the hot water heater that went out. But the most successful asks and the most successful campaigns are when you package them together. And then, are these projects of interest to both you and your stakeholders? And now Mrs. Smith might be one of your stakeholders, and we'll talk a little bit about this when we talk about the developing relationships. She maybe isn't right on board right at the beginning, but as you build your case and as she sees the benefits of it, she is one of your stakeholders and she might come around. Jeff, did you want to add?
Yeah, I just have a real life example here. I'm working with a church right now, and they want to do a Miracle Sunday, and their big project was a parking lot. And I might be leader of the trustees, but I hate doing facility stuff. I find, how am I going to raise money for a parking lot? The second thing they wanted to include was a mortgage. So how do you motivate people to do that? So we had to go back and talk about it amongst the leadership team. And that parking lot has been a thorn in their backside for about 15 to 20 years. And actually, the whole town, since the church has been developing, the town used to, the main road used to be on the other side of the church, and now the main road is on the side with the parking lot that looks like a bad side. So they've all of a sudden seen it as, this is the first impression of our church, is this bad parking lot with weeds and everything in it. And we just aren't moving forward. So we built a case. And the pastor happens to be very close to retirement. And so we ended up saying, well, this is going to be setting up the next pastor and the next generation. So they found a theme for it, paving our way to the future. So if we can take care of this eyesore and we can take care of this debt, the next pastor and the leaders of the church that are going to keep going forward are going to have an easier time reaching the community for Christ. And they also have this great wall of fame, too, that they're tying into it as well, because that's showing this is what we want to replicate going forward, is raising up people for ministry, raising up people for to be leaders in the church world, no matter where they end up at. So, but that was, for me, it was nice to talk to that, because it's funny. They did a Miracle Sunday 6 years ago for the parking lot and didn't raise enough money to do it then. This time, they have a goal of $200,000, and they already raised half of it before even officially launching the campaign. And partially it's because they got a very clear mission, very clear case, if you want to call it. So anyway, it was neat to see how that really does work, building your case. Before it was just putting out this list of needs. Now we're tying it all together with our vision.
Right, and I think that's another thing to talk about, is that people, they will buy into the fact that you're working towards ministry. And another thing that they did, Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but didn't they add signage into their package too, so that the sign they have is not great for the amount of traffic that goes by? So
it's one of those signs with the little letters on there, white letters. And they want to do electronic sign. They want to add landscaping. So, I mean, it really is. They took the whole vision and kind of expanded upon it. So,
it became a beautification project instead of just a parking lot.
Yeah.
So Henry Nouwen is a professor and a pastor. Well, he was with the Catholic faith, and just a wonderful guy that has, fundraising as ministry is one of his focuses. He's now passed, but he was just a guy that really, really understood the spirituality of fundraising, really, and he even has a book that's called that. But he really can bring words into the fundraising and put it aside so that when you hear the word fundraising, you're not thinking of the Girl Scout cookies and you're not thinking of the Salvation Army, but how is it a spiritual gift that you have within yourself? So asking people for money is giving them the opportunity to put their resources at disposal of the kingdom. So we will get his name too when we add the resources and the links to some of the information that we're given today. But he's just a great guy of knowledge, and I invite everyone to see if you can find some of his works. So building your case, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. This is the scripture verse that we use on almost all of our things at the foundation. We had a gentleman tell us one time that one of my predecessors from way back was the one that said this to him, and this is where he put his entire trust, and he entrusted it to the church because that's where his heart is. And it really speaks volumes to what we're doing in the foundation and also what you're doing within your churches. So you want to focus on emotions. You want to focus on where people's hearts are. What will tug at the heartstrings? This one is, children's ministries and children's programming, they really can tug at people's heartstrings, but they have to have purpose behind it. How are they changing lives? How are they touching souls? How is the Holy Spirit working through them? Not just, we need another Sunday school class, but what is that doing and how are you building that so that people understand that you're helping children learn more about Jesus? And this, I think, is tough because we are trained, and all of us should work towards our tithe or our tithe goal. But members don't need to give. We can't expect, just because we're the church, that people are going to give. We have to find a way for them to want to give. We have to find a way for them to be compelled and connected with the ministries of the church. And if they're not being connected, then they're going to come to church and they're going to visit the church and go to worship for just their needs. But once they connect, they will then want to share their resources to help build those ministries. Now, this is the case statement that we're starting to work on for the conference. And this one, yours doesn't have to be as involved as this one is. We have put it together because we're going to go visit with some donors that we're hoping will support some of the ministries of the conference. But the concepts are the same. So we have a cover page, and then we'll have an about page talking about how the foundation and the conference are partnering. Then within the document, each page of the ministries that we're doing, we have, now let me see if I can get this little pointer thing going here. We have the leadership development, and so we will talk about the programs within leadership development. We have this placeholder. In each one of them, we'll have the amount that these programs cost the conference, so that people have an understanding that when they give to the conference, they give to the foundation, those dollars are going back into programming. From this leadership development, we have the Clergy Leadership Academy and the we have internships and scholarships and the Lilly grant programs. Just a minute. I've got another person that wants to join, and I can't do that with my laser. So with this document, then, each one of the highlighted ones, then we'll pull out. So like our Lilly grant program, we will pull out that Lilly grant program, and we'll have another page just like this talking about the Lilly grants. And we have 2 of them now, so we have a higher ground ones for the mental health and well-being of pastors, and then we have the financial assistance program too. So both of those will be highlighted. This helps us when we go to a donor, and I can give an example. I was talking to a donor one day about some of the programs that were going on at the conference, and she kept saying, but I want to help pastors. I want to help young pastors so that they're not as financially strapped when they get out of seminary. Well, that is a perfect opportunity then for me to turn to the page on the financial literacy and the financial support through the Lilly program that we will be sharing then with them. So I didn't have this document at that time, so I was kind of winging it off the cuff and was talking to her about it, and that's where she did support and give her money to. And then on top of that, she wanted half of the dollars to go to the camping program, which we too will have a page in here. So we want to be prepared for each one of the ministries so that it meets the needs and the love of the people that we're visiting with. Jeff, did you have a comment on the case statement?
A question actually, and what would you say are the main things to have in your case statement? Because whether it's a printed up piece like this or whether it's even just your handwritten notes, what would you say would be the essentials you should have in your case statement?
Well, I think that the main things is that you want to quote, or you want to know of a quote of how it impacted someone. You want to have the programs and the ministries listed so that you see that it's comprehensive and it's not just a one-shot deal or one program. And then you always want to have what it costs you. And that's subtle, but you want people to understand that these programs and these ministries within your churches are not free. And so if you can connect them with something that tugs at their heart, something that will grab their attention, then that will lead them to questions and lead them to wanting more information.
Almost, I mean, when I hear you talk about it, I hear the how is the programs, the how much is the dollar amount, and then the why is almost your example, your quote, or your testimony, or whatever you want to call that. So,
right.
So,
Great.
Okay.
And then when you're thinking about who you're going to use as your prospects and people that you want to connect to your ministries, you, of course, go to the capacity. And as we're cultivating those donors, people in your church have capacity. And never dismiss anybody. Never think, oh, they won't do it. They won't want to give. Until they tell you they don't, you don't know that for sure. Now, there's people who are incredibly involved in your church, but they probably don't have the means or the resources to help financially. So the ideal is if you can have somebody that is very involved, that has some cash or resources, that helps bring those together. If you have people who have capacity and they're not involved, that's where your case statement is. That's where it is that you invite them into your churches and see some of the ministries. One of the things at our church in Sioux Falls is that there's wonderful children's programs in our church, an after-school program, and there were people that have been interested in that, but they didn't know about it. So giving a tour, giving a tour when the activities are going on, and that has helped not only with resources, but it's helped also our Kids Stop program to become more volunteers are interested in it. But just telling about it doesn't always work sometimes. So you get them involved and see how the ministries are happening. But this is the ideal, is if you can get the capacity and the people involved all up into the ideal prospect. So how do you cultivate donors? Well, right now we're working on a project for a scholarship program, and we start with a campaign that we had before. So you start with, such in our case, was the Thrive campaign, and you look at who gave to the Thrive campaign and who had the questions and who had the interest in scholarships and people going into the ministry and young pastors. And yes, the pastor should know and have access to giving records of the church. And this is controversial all the time. People think that it leads them to have priorities and favorites and all of those things. But if you go back to the chart on the involvement and the capacity, those two things are equally as important. And everybody knows who's involved. So, and the pastor knows who's involved. They see them all the time. But they should have access to the giving records as well. One of the other reasons to have access to the giving records is that if the giving drops way off, there might be a reason. There might be a health reason. There might be something traumatic that has happened in their family. It could be a divorce. It could be a sibling or a child situation. You don't know that. And so it can be an indicator to see the health and well-being of your members as well. Create communication paths to tell your story and keep your constituents in the loop. One of the best ways to do this is it happens to be a newsletter. And print media is not going away. People say that it is because it's expensive and all of those reasons. Some people do like their information by email, but it's still the same document. You send the same document whether it's by snail mail or by email. But that communication is so important to tell the story of the ministries. And then develop relationships. Find out people's interests and their love for ministry. What are they interested in? What do they love to do? And sometimes they'll talk about what their outside interests are, what their loves outside the church, what they love to do on a Monday night, and then that can trigger some of the ideas of how they would connect with the ministries of the church. It's not just what their love is for the church, but what do they love to do? And then take time for a cup of coffee or a lunch. Jeff, did you want to talk to this?
No, I'm peeking ahead at the other slides, and I think we should talk about, I want to hear the other part. This is the part where I struggle with the most, is developing the relationships, and I already took some of Sherry's advice and applied it at the grocery store, although I did not get a donation. So that wasn't the goal. It was to build a relationship. So for those of you who weren't on earlier, I got a text right before the webinar tonight that said that after Jeff and I had gone through this earlier today, that some of the tips that I have shared in this in this webinar have already paid off, because he met somebody at and asked for more information to learn about this person at the grocery store. Yeah, I actually had a good conversation instead of awkward small talk. It was cool. So anyway.
So the other thing is to get to know the person as a person and more than their checkbook. It is really offensive to people who have means that if you come to them and ask for money every time there's a crisis, every time you want to be bailed out of something, it becomes very offensive to them. But if you make that connection with them and and help them understand how their resources, everybody has gifts, and resources is one of the spiritual gifts. So that's making the match, how the donor and the ministries match together. So you begin the conversation. So you focus on the donor. When you're going into this, you're focusing on the donor, and you're focusing on their interests, what they love, who they are, who their family is, what they've been involved with over the years, what other organizations they're involved in or that they support. Those are all wonderful conversation pieces to help you understand where they are and what they love about the church. And then remember always, it's not about you. When you go and visit with a donor, you have to let down the fact you want to share a story with them. You want to share something that's happening at the church. You want them to fix something. It's not about you. It's not about what your urgent need is right now. As easy it is to, in our minds, to tie our utilities or our operation needs in the immediate crisis, the light bill is truly the least important thing that donors want to give to. And the offering each week and the people in the pews should be paying the light bill.
Sherry, can I throw something in?
Sure.
I should have threw it in about it's not about you. One of the ways I saw I was sabotaging myself is that somebody would make a comment, and then I would throw myself into it, thinking I was making a connection. So, for example, even at the grocery store, so I didn't do it 100% perfect, but she was telling me about what she enjoyed about her part of the job, and I said, well, then I threw in my produce experience back when I was in college, but that I always think I'm making a connection there, but I'm really not. I'm redirecting it, and instead of going deeper with that one person to figure out what there is really driving them, I should be asking a question instead of making a statement about what my experience with it is, or my friend's experience with it, or whatever it is. So.
Correct. Yep, and to do that, just one more question would help lead to that for them.
Exactly.
They'll ask you if they want to hear from you, they'll ask the question.
If you can make more questions than you make statements, I think that's probably a win.
That's exactly right. And then what is the compelling reason that they should support the ministries of the church? And because it's the church isn't the right answer. What is behind that? What is the compelling reason? We've had to learn that in the conference, that our programs we feel are phenomenal, that we are reaching new people, we are helping new pastors, but just because we think that, we have to give examples, and we need to show that we are producing so that we have a compelling reason for people who want to give and support our ministries to continue. So some of the questions to consider are you giving your members an opportunity to connect with others in the church? Are there, if you ask somebody to do something, is there a connectional piece? Or are you asking them to do it to get the task done? And that can be even the boiler. You will have, if you do need to get a new boiler, you will have a better opportunity and connect with people if you ask more than one person or if you make it a joint effort among others. But what are some of the other ways that you, in your programming, in your Bible studies, in your women's groups, your men's groups, your ministries and outreach and out into the community, and your children program, how are you connecting these people with each other through your ministry? Do your members and do your donors that you're going to work with believe in the mission or the ministry of the church? Do they believe the direction that you're going? Do they believe that it will continue? We had a great opportunity one time. We were asking for a pretty substantial gift, up to about $500,000 we were asking for. And the donor asked us, how will you guarantee these ministries and the work that you're doing to help young pastors and to help all pastors in financial trouble, and how are you working to develop programs for called ministry? How are you going to guarantee that this will continue once the bishop retires? Because, so much of this is led, and programs are led by your leader. And so in your church, it's your senior pastor, it's your main pastor, and in our case, it's the bishop. And we could confidently tell this donor that the systems are in place for us to be able to continue those ministries, and that we've built the programs enough that we will be able to continue those, really for as long as the conceivable future. We don't see it changing. So we were confident. We've got a track record to show that that's the track that we're on. So those are the things. You've got to have that belief in your mission or the ministry for the donors. And do they trust the leadership of the church? And this isn't pointed at just maybe the pastor at all. This is the total leadership, lay leadership. Some of our pastors are doing phenomenal work in trying to bring everybody together, and they've got some committees or some leadership in their church that are holding back the vision of the church. So it's not, this isn't pointed at just a pastor, but leadership as a whole. Is there trust in that leadership for your church? And as you're thinking about these one-time gifts and these large gifts, is the church in a safe place for a legacy gift, for someone to want to build into their estate? And this is a whole nother webinar on legacy gift and end-of-life gifts that we will do at another time. But you want that in the back of your minds as well. A state attorney told me one time that only 7 to 11% of the people that he talks with as he's setting up their wills and their legacies even mention the church when they go to see where they would like their gifts to be placed. They don't think about it. So it's really our responsibility to help remind people that the church is going to be here, and we're going to, when we have a trusted place for them to give to and to leave their legacy. And then, of course, is there a tax benefit for the donor? And one of the things that I always say is to have them check with their tax consultant or their personal financial consultant. Don't answer those questions if this is a benefit for them, especially with all the changing tax laws right now. It's really not our place to do that, but it's our place to raise the awareness. Jeff?
Yeah, to think about even just knowing the common things about taxes, like the alternative giving opportunities. So if you're just even if you don't know it all, but there's ways to give that is the church gets the same amount, but it cuts the donor's tax liability. So like I say, donating stock, donating commodities, wheat, cattle, donating from your IRA if you're above the age of, is it 71 and a half? I think you have that mandatory distribution. So some of those things are just nice to keep in your back of your mind. So, or if you have a tax accountant type of person in your church, visit with them and say, what would be a good thing to encourage my people to give to that would, or how to give that would help them tax-wise. So.
And then share your story. When telling your story, stop selling and begin teaching. I get caught up in this sometimes too, because I think that sometimes we're the salesperson for the resource development and that type of thing. But it's way more compelling, and it's way more engaging when you begin to teach about the wonderful things that you're doing. So what great things are happening at your church? And I just talked about this. You want to get to the heart of the people, make them compelling, be honest and truthful. And then, Jeff and I have seen this time and time again. We both have a similar, or well, no, we both have the same story because we were in worship at the same time. But ask people who have been touched by the Holy Spirit to share their testimony. There's really nothing more moving than that. And there isn't a bigger buy-in than when somebody from the congregation will tell their story.
And it's hard to argue with that. I just heard a story like that. The pastor of the church I was at, it was Mount Vernon United Methodist Church. They had us tell each other about what is our favorite meal. And then they said, then we had to share with the same person what was our favorite experience with God. So it was just almost a warm up, and it was moving, even in that just little bit. So,
right.
Yeah.
And when you're visiting with your donors or with building these relationships, the hardest thing to do is to stop talking. And I can't get this gal to stop during this part of the presentation, so I apologize for this, but this is sometimes, have you ever just listened to a person and you just want to lay your head down? Please stop talking. Most of that time is because it's they get nervous and it becomes awkward. But just remember, as you're telling these things, is that you want to concentrate on your stories, but less is more. Don't over talk it, don't over quote, sell it, don't over tell it. And then practice living in awkward silence. Now we're kind of running close on time here, so I'm not going to do this here, but take a minute sometime in the next day when things are busy and stop for 1 minute. And then learn to live in that, because that awkward silence for 1 minute can seem like an eternity.
Well, and a number of people here are leaders in the church. So whenever you ask for a time of silent prayer, I mean, that's the same kind of deal. If you've ever put a clock on that, 30 seconds feels like 5 minutes. So. And
then don't impose your thoughts on what you think the donor should do. If there's a connection and you can connect them with the ministry, then they will make the decision. But when we try to impose, Farmer Joe had a really good crop this year, so he should give to this ministry, the men's ministry, because he's been involved and we need more money because we're now going to ask the community to join us 1 month out of the year. If he hasn't been involved in the men's ministry, or he hasn't been at the level and he's not interested there, it's not for us to decide if he should or what we expect them to give. And guilting them into it is not going to help with future gifts. And then allow for questions. When you're at the end and you are working with someone who might have some resources, and you lay out your case and you ask them for a gift, allow for questions and be prepared. And that's why, again, the case statement, or at least having the information, will help with answering those questions. I think silence is one of the greatest gifts we have. And Mr. Rogers was the one that has said this. And it was interesting because my husband Randy and I watched the special on Mr. Rogers last Saturday night. Maybe some of you saw it as well. But this one, as I was putting this presentation together, this one struck me. And silence is one of the greatest gifts we have. So just remember that as you're learning and listening. So listening allows us to hear the donors and what's on their hearts. When you hear a no, don't panic. A no is usually not a hard no. No's can mean many things. Like, I'm not interested in this project. That's why you always have a backup of one that they might be interested in. Maybe they're not able to help now. Maybe something else or catastrophic has happened in their family. Maybe there's been some financial shifts that you're not aware of. Maybe another family member needed help. Maybe they're hugely involved in another campaign that you're not aware of. And then maybe they just plain want to support another ministry of the church and that they want more answers and more information about that. And then probably the most important piece of all of this is the thank you. Thank you is stewardship. So you always want to find a way to thank a donor or a member, and this goes on the involvement piece as well as on the contribution piece. Now there's the generic thank yous that any of you who have donated to the foundation have probably gotten from us. We try to personalize them a little more if we can, and write a note on them. If there's a big event that you've had and you want to thank a lot of people and you want a generic thank you, those are fine for certain levels of giving. But if you have a moment, write a note at the bottom of it to say thank you, a personal note on top of the generic thank you. And then, of course, a personalized thank you letter goes a long way. A handwritten note goes even farther. Sometimes if it's a large gift or if it's a completion of a campaign and somebody really came through to help you, recognition and worship is important, but make sure that that's what the donor wants, because we've had gifts that, yeah, that would be great. They would really love to have the people within their church know where these dollars came from because it was in memory of a spouse that had passed away. Now we have another donor that has given a pretty substantial amount to us, and she wants no recognition. In fact, she wouldn't even meet the bishop. I tried to get them to connect with the bishop, both come out to her place where she lives, and also we brought her to annual conference one time, and she didn't even want to meet him at annual conference. So you want to be true to the wishes of the donor. And this one, I hate the naming rights, but our world has come to that. So sometimes it's very, very important to a donor. I'm getting better about it with the naming rights and understanding it, but be aware that that might be very important to a donor. And many, many times the naming rights could be on a scholarship in memory of. We do have a couple people that have given to the scholarship program or to a children's ministry program or that type of thing in memory of their spouses, and then it makes total sense. If someone gives you a gift which is anonymous, they still get a thank you. They can still have a phone call because they know somebody knows. It's usually just the public recognition that they want you to stay away from. And then if you have an annual report or if you do a recap of your major project and you do a follow-up of that project, then in the annual report or in that follow-up project is also a way to recognize the donors. Jeff, do you have anything to add here?
No, I think it's excellent. I think the more you can help people identify who needs the personal thank yous, that helps. I mean, so for example, for the conference, I went through all of our individual donors and I selected based on some criteria who I would want Rebecca Trebs, our director of ministries, to do a personal handwritten thank you on. And so that just made it a little bit easier that Rebecca just had to have these individual ones. I did most of the work for her, and that's what a good team should do. Somebody should be able to make it a little bit easier to thank people, and appropriately thank people.
Well, Jeff, thanks. You bring up a great point there. When I say the personal handwritten notes or the personal thank you letters, that doesn't have to come from just your leadership or your administrative team. It can come from anybody in the church. Sometimes there will be a thank you committee, or I don't know what else they call them, but a thank you committee that will come in and write thank you notes on behalf of the church, but they write them as a committee, and they get together, they have a cup of coffee, and they sit down and thank the members of their church in that way. So that brings us to the end of our webinar this time. I hope there are a few nuggets that we shared that will be beneficial to you out into your churches. As always, please do not hesitate to contact either one of us or anyone in our departments, or really anyone in the conference. We're here to help you. And we would welcome any feedback as well, but we would also appreciate it if you wanted to share this information, or if there's ways that we can help you and come out into your churches, we'd be glad to do that as well. So thank you.